Today we will dive into the dark depths of the human psyche. We will focus on one of the most outspoken crime stories, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. This serial killer, whose crimes cause horror and bewilderment, will become the object of our attention. In this video, we dive into the psychological maze of his mind, trying to figure out what could have pushed him into the darkness of serial murders. Let's look not only at his cruel deeds, but also analyze the details of his past life, looking for clues to understanding the roots of such extremely deviant behavior. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in 1960 in West Ellis, Wisconsin, USA. His mother worked as a teacher, his father was a chemist. This fact is very important, since most serial killers come from dysfunctional families. But here we see an example of an intelligent family. As a child, Dahmer was very fond of animals. However, his parents constantly moved, which forced them to abandon the animals to which the little Dahmer became attached. This probably affected his psyche. Later it will be clear exactly how. Jeffrey was considered a very unsociable and withdrawn child who had little contact with others, which made him alienated at first from classmates, and later from army comrades, from relatives and acquaintances. Alienation plays an important but not fundamental role in shaping the personality of a serial killer, giving rise to suspicion and hostility towards the whole world around them. It also provokes the development of infantilism, the inability to empathize with other people, which contributes to the commission of crimes. A significant influence was also the fact that Dahmer's mother was very ill after she gave birth to Jeffrey. He saw this and blamed himself, which gave rise to a sense of guilt and inferiority in him. He felt unnecessary to his own parents, so he developed anxiety, which also contributes a lot to the formation of deviant behavior. There are three phases in the development of psychologically alienated individuals: the occurrence of an alarm reaction, accumulation of negative unconscious experiences, which are mostly hidden in nature, exhaustion, which manifests itself in the form of violent actions towards a social environment subjectively perceived as hostile. Rejection also leads to a lack of a sense of security, to the formation of a neurotic personality, and, accordingly, to the fear of death. This is an observation that actually explains why serial killers find it very difficult to commit suicide, even though sometimes they really want to. The same Dahmer, for example, often tried to commit suicide, but did not have the courage. When Dahmer turned about 10 years old, he began collecting animal corpses on the road, dismembering them and dissolving body parts in acid. It should be noted that he did not kill animals, but, on the contrary, loved them very much. Even often quarreled with friends because they mocked stray dogs. This is very unusual for a serial killer, since almost all maniacs abuse animals in childhood, such as, for example, Henry Lee Lucas or Edmund Kemper. Although, of course, such a hobby for a boy is also very disturbing. It is unlikely that it is a sign of a child's commitment to chemistry. While at school, Dahmer continued his experiments with animals, and he later admitted that dissecting animal corpses gave him a sense of power, superiority and dominance, which he enjoyed. At the age of 14, he realizes his non-traditional orientation, which forces him to look for a greater source of pleasure and act recklessly. He also started drinking alcohol, which seemed to bring him relief, helped him avoid feelings of alienation and homosexual fantasies. Alcohol, however, only promotes the release of sexual aggression, facilitates the occurrence of affect and strengthens it. Thus, we see before us a number of factors that undoubtedly greatly contributed to the transformation of a quiet boy into a young man with unbridled sexual desires for men. Such desires could arise from the desire to control the situation in life, however, taking into account Dahmer's complete inability to dominate others. Such needs were reflected in his sexual preferences. Dahmer was aware of the abnormality of his desires, tried not to think about them, using the only way available to him for abstraction, alcohol. However, alcohol provided temporary relief and, even as we understand it now, only aggravated the situation. At the age of 18, Dahmer killed his first victim. It happened exactly at the time when his parents divorced and separated, leaving Jeffrey alone in an empty house. This behavior of the parents only increased the feeling of alienation, uselessness. Dahmer fantasized a lot during that period. It should be noted that fantasizing is a very important part of the modus operandi of a serial killer, because it is during it that he imagines what he will do to the victim when she gets in his way. Dahmer fantasized that one day he would drive a car, meet a hitchhiker, pick him up and take him to his home, where they would have a great time together. Such a fantasy came to life in an amazing way, but it ended in a completely different way. After Jeffrey and his new acquaintance had a drink, he began to pack up to leave. Dahmer wanted the hitchhiker to stay, but didn't know how to stop him. He was drunk, and alcohol, as mentioned earlier, releases sexual aggression, which can manifest itself in completely unexpected forms. Jeffrey grabbed a hand dumbbell and killed his new acquaintance with a blow to the head. Thus, there was a simultaneous outburst of the unconscious energy that had been accumulating in him throughout this time. After the first murder, a serial offender may sincerely repent and regret what he did. This is exactly what Dahmer felt in the first time after the crime was committed. However, as mentioned earlier, for a maniac, murder is akin to a drug. It releases that energy that cannot find other outlets except for this momentary surge. Ted Bundy, for example, admitted that the first murder caused him a sharp sense of guilt. However, over time it went away. After the murder, Dahmer experienced a real shock, not expecting this from himself. However, he had enough judgment left in him to understand the illegality of his actions, and therefore take measures to eliminate the evidence. He dismembered the victim's body and hid it in the woods. Here we see the typical behavior of an organized, unsocial serial killer. Nevertheless, it cannot be said that Dahmer did not experience any negative emotions during the dismemberment of the body. On the contrary, it was very unpleasant for him to do it, so much so that he resorted to alcohol. For the next 9 years, Dahmer was able to control his desires. Perhaps the mechanisms of mental protection had not yet fully atrophied. At first, Dahmer found an outlet in serving in the army, which he really liked, but nothing could replace the feeling of relaxation and calmness that came after the first crime. And therefore, between 1987 and 1991, he killed 16 more people. In court, both the prosecution and the defense were well-known psychiatrists who gave their conclusions based on the conversations they had with Jeffrey Dahmer. Dr. Fred Berlin believed that Dahmer was not able to realize his actions during the commission of crimes, as he suffered from necrophilia, which is classified as a mental personality disorder, and therefore a person suffering from this disease should be sent to a psychiatric hospital. He stated that Dahmer could not avoid thoughts of murder, and necrophilia is not at all the choice of the accused himself. Prosecutor McCann, during an interview with a psychiatrist, forced him to admit that Dahmer was a liar, which in itself indicated that he was able to assess the illegality of the actions he committed. The ability to lie successfully is a sign of a psychopathic personality, which, in turn, indicates that a serial killer has a well-defined mask of normality and belongs to the type of organized unsocial killers. In order for a person to be declared insane, the court must answer to questions facing them. Did the accused have a mental personality disorder? And could the accused have been aware of the illegality of his actions during the commission of crimes? If the answer to the first question was an unconditional yes, that the court should answer the second question, and only then make a decision on sending the accused either to a psychiatric hospital or to prison. So, the fact that Dahmer was able to hide his double life for all these 13 years spoke of him as a pretty smart person. Dr. Berlin, however, believed that in order to be abnormal, it is not necessary to have low intelligence. In his opinion, Dahmer could be an excellent liar, actor, and excellent at hiding his emotions. But this did not mean that he did not have a mental illness. Dr. Judith Becker paid great attention to Dahmer's childhood. She explained how Jeffrey was affected by the fact that the Dahmer family had to abandon the animals he was attached to. In her opinion, Dahmer killed his victims and kept their body parts at home because he was afraid of being abandoned, because he was looking for company. Even if the corpses of the lovers he killed acted as his comrades, this feeling of abandonment was formed in Jeffrey also during the time when his father and mother constantly quarreled, which subsequently led to the divorce of the Dahmer couple. Jeffrey had no close friends. He did not talk about his problems with anyone, did not communicate closely, and was mostly alone. Dr. Becker's conclusions were poorly substantiated from a scientific point of view, and therefore her testimony was not considered too closely. In the end, she diagnosed Dahmer with necrophilia, which answered in the affirmative to the first question posed to psychiatrists. Dr. Carl Wallstrom described Dahmer as a white man of 31 with serious and very advanced mental disorders, whose personality is primitive, rigid, and evasive. He also emphasized that Jeffrey had fantasies and delusional obsessions, such as, for example, creating zombies by pouring acid into the subcortical region of the brain. Fantasizing is an unmistakable sign of a disorganized antisocial killer. Dr. Wallstrom believed that Dahmer had a mental personality disorder, and therefore he should be placed in a psychiatric clinic, where he would receive the necessary help. Dr. George Palermo, one of the most famous American and Italian forensic psychiatrists, believed that Dahmer had accumulated internal hostility generated by his inability to defend himself in front of other children who teased him. Due to Jeffrey's chronic inability to form interpersonal relationships, and due to frustration with his sexual orientation, Jeffrey became a sexual sadist. Palermo believed that the craving for cruelty and aggressiveness led to the formation of criminal behavior in Jeffrey Dahmer. His sexual desires functioned as a way of expressing the destructive energy that was accumulating in him. Palermo denied that Dahmer had necrophilia and believed that the murders were the result of his internal aggression. He killed these men because he wanted to kill the source of his homosexual attraction. By killing them, he was killing what he hated most about himself. Dr. Palermo denied that Dahmer killed men for the sake of company, but only to silence them. He killed because he realized how angry they would be at him. However, the psychiatrist added, oddly enough, he is a pretty good person. Dr. Samuel Friedman believed that Dahmer killed because he needed company. He spoke kindly of Jeffrey, describing him as a pleasant young man in all respects, with a sense of humor, beauty and charm, who was and remains a bright and, in principle, not a bad person. Friedman told how Dahmer was trying to figure out on his own what was wrong with him and why it all happened. Jeffrey told the psychiatrist in detail about himself, hoping that he would understand the root cause of such deviant drives. I hope that something can be done to cure this man, who definitely has intelligence and charm, Friedman said of Dahmer. Despite his sympathy, he recognized Jeffrey as sane because he could resist his desires. If their immediate fulfillment could lead to exposure, he was planning a crime and could abandon it if it threatened him. Planning crimes, according to Friedman, is a clear indication that Dahmer does not have a mental personality disorder. Dr. Fred Fostel believed that Dahmer did not have a mental personality disorder, and he was sane at the time of the crimes. He described Jeffrey as a calculating and cold-blooded killer who killed only for his sexual gratification. During cross-examination, Dahmer's lawyer asked the psychiatrist if he considered him a necrophile, to which Fostel replied in the negative. He believed that this was not his main sexual preference. The psychiatrist could not adequately explain in his favor the fact that Dahmer was trying to create a zombie slave for himself, which is fundamentally an unhealthy idea. Therefore, he eventually had to admit the fact that Jeffrey had a mental personality disorder. However, he continued to claim that he was sane. Dr. Park Dietz, one of the most famous and respected forensic psychiatrists, gave the most reasonable characterization of Dahmer as a serial killer. He believed that Dahmer did not have a mental personality disorder, as he thought over his crimes, drugged his Yervain with sleeping pills before killing, which indicates his complete sanity at the time of the crimes. He also noted the fact that Jeffrey himself used alcohol to kill, since the murder process did not bring him any pleasure at all. Dietz agreed with the early statement that we don't choose our sexual preferences. However, he believed that Dahmer was quite capable of controlling himself. He noted that we all have desires, but we can restrain them, as well as those who suffer from various kinds of paraphilia. Dietz immediately ruled out the idea that Dahmer was a sadist, as he did not torture his victims and did everything to prevent their torment. He also mentioned Dahmer's latest crimes, which were undoubtedly ill-conceived and spontaneous, and he explained this by his alcohol intoxication, and not by progressive insanity. Dr. Robert Hare is a well-known Canadian psychologist, specialist in criminal psychology, professor of psychology at the University of British Columbia, developer of the most famous control questionnaire for determining the degree of personality psychopathology and predicting aggressive behavior. Working in the Canadian and American penitentiary systems, Hare devoted more than a quarter of a century to the study of psychopathic criminals and identified personality traits and behavioral features, forming together the syndrome of psychopathy. Together with his colleagues, Dr. Hare has compiled a checklist of questions for assessing psychopathy and a number of other questionnaires based on it, which allow you to more or less accurately determine the degree of psychopathy of a particular person. These tools help to identify an individual's specific set of personality traits and socially deviant behaviors, which can be divided into 4 groups: interpersonal, affective, vital, and antisocial. Robert Hare notes the confusion in household terminology, when a psychopath is often called mentally ill, crazy. However, the difference is precisely that the psychopath has absolutely no disorder of consciousness inherent in different types of insanity. He does everything in full sanity. Therefore, for forensic psychiatrists and for judicial authorities, the definition of the sanity and insanity of the criminal turns out to be fundamental. The psychopath is completely sane and committed the crime fully aware of his actions, whatever they may be. In fact, the most terrible criminals turn out to be either psychotics suffering from mental confusion, or psychopaths with a sufficiently clear consciousness, but without any sense of guilt. The checklist of signs of psychopathy provides a detailed overview. Hare indicates the main symptoms: emotional or personal characteristics, talkativeness and superficiality, egocentricity and pretentiousness, lack of guilt and regret, lack of empathy, cunning and manipulative tendencies, superficiality of emotions, features of social behavior, impulsivity, weak behavioral control, the need for mental arousal, irresponsibility, problematic behavior in childhood, antisocial behavior in adulthood. These are just general symptoms, which does not mean that everyone who can notice such signs, especially only some of them, is a psychopath. However, these are the features that are peculiar to them. If these features coincide with the general psychopathic scenario, we can suspect something is wrong at the household level and honestly admit it to ourselves. On a professional level, take a closer look, draw conclusions and make certain decisions. Robert Hare drew attention to the fact that in order to solve serial crimes, first of all, it is necessary to understand the nature of psychopathy, which affects the formation of the personality of a serial killer. Studies have shown that the intensity of psychopathy in criminals varies. Not all perpetrators of violent crimes are psychopaths, and not all psychopaths can be classified as maniacs. If the perpetrator is a psychopath, he attacks, rapes, and kills without thinking about the criminal, moral, or social consequences. His mental state allows him to do what he wants and when he wants. Not all psychopaths become serial killers. Rather, serial killers may possess several or many qualities that relate to psychopathy. Psychopathic criminals do not value human life and treat their victims extremely cruelly. This is especially evident in sexual maniacs who choose, track down, then attack and kill a person without the slightest remorse. It would be wrong to believe that the motivations of a serial killer are explained by psychopathy alone, but understanding psychopathy is necessary in the investigation of serial murders. It greatly simplifies the disclosure of the case. In particular, the criminal handwriting of a psychopath differs from the criminal style of other criminals, and it can help the police to link individual episodes into a single series. It is also worth noting that Robert Ressler, an FBI agent who played a key role in the development of profiling techniques, made a great contribution to the profiling of serial killers. His work allows you to analyze the behavior of criminals, identify their characteristics, and create profiles, which helps in the investigation and disclosure of serial murders. Until quite recently, criminologists did not have a special term for murderers who left behind many victims. It was only a few decades ago that Robert Ressler coined the term serial killer. Ressler not only helped create the FBI's criminal behavior unit, but also became the first specialist in profiling serial killers, interviewing some of the most famous criminals of all time. Throughout his FBI career, Ressler has worked on high-profile serial killer cases including John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, and Ed Kemper. Ressler suggested that many serial killers were loners, cruel to animals, and control-mad, consumed by their fantasies. They tended to move to larger cities in order to have a better choice of victims and be able to hide among people. Ressler was interested in someone who appeared to be an organized serial killer, but lost control when they committed the murders, which would classify him as a disorganized serial killer. During Ressler's career, all serial killers were either organized or disorganized. After leaving the FBI in 1990, Robert Ressler began working as a consultant. He advised Thomas Harris on the character Hannibal Lecter, much like the serial killers Ressler interviewed. Ressler's former partner John Douglas wrote a quickly popular book called The Mindhunter, which inspired Netflix to create a show of the same name. The character of Bill Tench is based on the personality of Robert Ressler. Robert Ressler died on May 5, 2013. The innovative work he did at that time continues to help criminal profiling specialists today. Ressler was able to interview Dahmer several times. Wrestlers said Dahmer's open honesty set him apart from killers like Gacy and Ted Bundy. In fact, Jeffrey Dahmer also had a metaphysical problem related to the lack of faith in God, without which human life has no value. Dahmer was an atheist. His quote, "If a person does not think that there is a God to whom he will have to answer, then what is the point of changing his behavior to keep it within acceptable boundaries?" Jeffrey Dahmer rationalized his behavior by saying that animals kill and eat other animals, and according to his beliefs at the time, he was the same as any other animal. His father started sending him anti-evolutionary materials, and Jeffrey, having nothing better, started reading them. Dahmer soon came to the conclusion that evolution was false, which opened his worldview to change. He began to believe in God and was baptized on May 10, 1994. He was constantly visited by the man who baptized him, Roy Ratcliffe, who continued to talk to him until Dahmer was killed in prison. In another, besides the serial killer's general topographer, Dahmer was not disgusted by his victims. In fact, it was quite the opposite, as Dahmer admitted that he liked them. However, he had a certain physical type that he was attracted to, as he preferred men who were younger, had a good physique. All of his victims ranged in age from 14 to 31. Most of his victims were African American. Strangely enough, they weren't all homosexuals either. Dahmer did not seek extensive homosexual relationships, but to quench his thirst for power and control. Therefore, it did not matter to him whether his victim was heterosexual or not. There were also circumstances or personality characteristics that Dahmer paid attention to when choosing his victims. He often met men in gay bars or at gay events. Dahmer didn't have much time to stalk his victims because he had a regular job 6 days a week. His desire to kill was impulsive, but his need to kill was also impulsive. He simply couldn't waste time on trivialities. He also wanted victims who might not be in the best financial situation, such as those who didn't have cars. Thanks to the numerous photographs of his victims that Dahmer took before and after their murders and which were found in his house when he was arrested on July 22, 1991, the police were able to collect exactly what happened for most of the murders. Dahmer strangled his victims and then dismembered them so that he could keep a part of them with him forever. Strangulation also involves intimacy with violent sexual fantasies, which Dahmer also demonstrated by often giving his victims drugs in his drinks, so that they could not resist his advances. Profilers have gained a lot from studying Dahmer's mind as part of a comprehensive approach to recognizing serial killers. Profilers have learned to look for patterns that may indicate violent behavior similar to Dahmer's case, including its unique features and psychological makeup, which serve as an indicator of the actions of other potential offenders. Dahmer's early life and development highlight the value of early intervention. Recognizing indicators of psychological stress or deviant behavior became an area of interest. Dahmer's fascination with dead animals and isolation were telling signs that subsequently hinted at deeper problems. The case highlighted the need for mental health professionals, educators, and parents to be vigilant and proactive when it comes to detecting signs of stress or abnormal behavior in children and adolescents. As for the strategy of law enforcement agencies in the function of preventing such antisocial behavior, they have changed the vector of work, paying more attention to psychological assessment, and not only to criminal acts. Investigators are heavily focused on understanding suspicious motives and mental state as the basis of any potential repeat offenses. Behaviors that may lead to repeat offenses should also be carefully studied, as this includes examining their history, habits, interactions with other people, as well as public perception. The publicity surrounding the Dahmer case has had a huge impact on public perception. While Dahmer's crimes have brought public attention to untreated mental illness, they have also started conversations about compassion and support for those living with psychological disorders. His crimes have also opened up a debate about mental health in America as an issue and led to calls for improved infrastructure and policies regarding the provision of mental health care. The case highlighted the lack of available support systems for people suffering from severe mental illness. Families, schools, and healthcare providers play important roles in influencing these issues. The Dahmer case served as a catalyst for significant reforms in approaches to criminal justice, psychological assessments, and social attitudes toward mental health. In addition, his story has shed light on the complex relationship between individual psychology and criminal behavior, highlighting the need for comprehensive strategies to prevent the recurrence of such actions. Jeffrey Dahmer remains one of the most disturbing figures in criminal history, not only because of the nature of his crimes, but also because of their psychological complexity. His case forces society to face difficult questions about evil, human cruelty, and mental illness in general. It provides valuable insight into criminal psychology, as well as awareness of mental illness. When studying such cases, we must apply what we have learned to prevent future tragedies and better understand human psychology.